So let me just get this straight, okay? You're telling me that men are choosing to go back decades in terms of development and technology and shit like that so that they can choose to go raw dogging, and yet it's not benefiting them at all? Like, I don't know, maybe it's just a me thing, but what?
The royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
Welcome to the Breakdown Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is a man who does not mind sushi, maybe because he doesn't mind eating that fish raw. He's a man who believes that astrology should have been the study of us. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. This is one of those episodes where it just sounds a little bit odd because it's like, it was said in the previous episode that I'd be going back to normal programming, but this isn't normal programming because of the way that I've sort of like structured stuff up. But hey, all in all, this is a new format I'm trying out. If you like it, you can tell me about it. If you don't like it, you can also tell me about it. But all in all, thank you so much for choosing to listen to the Breaktime Podcast. I hope you listen all the way till the end. And, if you have any feedback that you would like to give, whether it's likes, dislikes, or potential topics that you'd like me to talk about, then you can hit me up via the social media handles in the description. And I will be more than happy to take up whatever it is that you've told me and handle it accordingly if it needs to be handled. And maybe I just might end up turning it into an actual topic. Now, things on the podcast are going back to regular programming because I am off break. I am back in full gear and I am ready and willing to give you guys these full episodes with these interesting main topics and some of my many rants because, in as much as I do enjoy the rest time, sometimes I just come across certain stories that I really want to talk about, but I can't because it's like I'm on break, so I'm not supposed to be talking about it, but it sounds like it would be so interesting to put on the podcast, and I kind of have to let it go. But since I am back to full programming, I am going to at least get back to talking about those, and I have a main topic that is revolving around relationships, but more so guy relationships and, the kind of friendships and platonic relationships that guys have, and I will be getting to that in a couple of minutes. But before I do that, I first want to start by talking about some of the trends, or should I say trend, that some people have decided to take up that is very odd and a little bit weird in my opinion. And that was mostly based off of the name that trend has and just how pointless it seems to be in the grand scheme of stuff that you can do to improve your life. Now, the trend itself is referred to as, get this, raw dogging. Now, normally if you'd hear something like that, you'd expect that if it's a trend, then, it probably involves sex or some version of copulation or, some sort of explicit act that involves, your penis or some shit. But no, that's not exactly what they're trying to do. It's nowhere near related to your penis. It involves the actual head and it is not even explicit at all, which is weird because why call it raw dogging then? But all that to say, apparently there is this trend known as raw dogging, and I found out about it from a post which was entitled, "Men are quote-unquote raw dogging it on flights by giving up an all-in flight entertainment and instead stare at the real-time flight map for the entire duration of the flight." Now, the small caption that came with this entire post said, and I quote, "Raw dogging is the latest travel trend where passengers forego in-flight entertainment, music, snacks, and sleep enduring long flights with no distractions." Inspired by Idris Elba's character in the Apple TV Plus series Hijacked, this anti-indulgence approach pushes travelers to their mental and physical limits. End quote. Okay, I'm trying to actually just match up whatever the hell I've read with the entire logic around it because, usually whenever guys pick up a trend, usually it has something that's either useful or productive, and that's usually when it involves some version of self-sacrifice, and if not, that's when it's usually fun. But this is what they're doing. So let me just get this straight, okay? You're telling me that men are choosing to go back decades in terms of development and technology and shit like that so that they can choose to go raw dogging, and yet it's not benefiting them at all? I don't know, maybe it's just a me thing, but what? I'm actually just confused about this entire thing because, what's the benefit of it all? usually this level of self-sacrifice requires some sort of benefit. Like, if you're looking at nofap as a trend, there was the whole belief that you become more powerful and you have clearer thought and shit. Like, that was the supposed benefit. There's things like semen retention that are supposed to have roughly the same benefits, but they're not too far off. Then you think about stuff like cold plunges, cold showers. There's a certain sacrifice on the convenience of like a hot shower, and there's supposed to be benefits for like cold plunges, but this entire thing solves nothing. Like, in-flight entertainment, snacks and shit is supposed to make flights better. Like, I don't even think the pilots usually decide to do it like this. Even pilots don't raw dog like this. So what's the logic behind it? And this is literally all because of a series. Okay, granted, I haven't watched the series or anything, but I'm hoping it's actually good, but I don't see the entire use case in this entire thing. It's like, imagine if Avengers Endgame had a bunch of dads constantly telling their daughters that they love them 3000. Like, at least that would make a little bit more sense. It would introduce like a fun new twist, but raw dogging though, I don't know. It just seems a little bit odd to me. Like, I don't see any benefits in it. But anyways, that's probably just a me thing. But you know what? Considering that it's not like these guys are really hurting anyone and it's not something that's particularly explicit, I guess we could just let them have it. And maybe after I've watched the series, then I might choose to agree with them. But all in all, I am going to leave it at that and move it on to our main topic of this episode. Now, if you listen to the previous episode 514, the one that is hookers versus hookups, I did quite a bit of talking around the whole topic of, guys and the quote-unquote need to have sex. Now, if you haven't listened to it and you want to go back and listen, you can pause now and then go back and listen to it. Although, if you don't feel like doing that, even if I don't see why you wouldn't want to, I can just give you the quick TLDR. So it was a story that was revolving around someone who had spoken about the value of hookers and why it is that, he understands why guys go for prostitutes and shit. And I spoke about the value of sex and how for us guys, we have this, desire for sex that seems like it's so much. And a big part of the reason why I think that that's the case is probably because we might actually be deriving more value from sex than we actually think we do. And it kind of gives a pretty good idea as to why it is women may seem a little bit more passive towards sex. They're very okay with not having it, but it's like guys are so into the idea of having it beyond our conditioning of it as this privilege or as part of this reward. And it's definitely because there's more value to it than just the physical. And I went into how supposedly for a lot of us guys, especially today, we derive a lot of intrinsic, possibly emotional value from sex, which is why we seem like we want it a hell of a lot more than the women do. Now, women do want that same value that us guys are looking for in sex, that intrinsic sort of deep connected value, but for the women, they know that they can get it elsewhere from their close female to female friendships because, they tend to have a lot of affection with each other, they can exercise love languages with each other as friends, but us guys haven't really had that. And I kind of remember after doing that entire discussion, doing the entire recording and everything, plus also while I was editing, I was constantly thinking about the idea of us guys not being able to derive that intrinsic value that we look for in sex, much as we don't know that we're looking for in sex. Now, granted, like I said in that episode, I might be wrong, and a lot of that was based off of the fact that I value physical touch as a love language. But all in all, I kind of had to think about it for a bit because for a lot of the women, like I said, they can get a lot of the value that us guys seem to want and seem to derive from sex from their female friendships. That affection for each other, that, deep sort of connection that they have between each other. It's like they seem to have it so well and they seem to love it so much that, they're very comfortable not being with a guy and just choosing to remain single, choosing to not be in any relationships and not even look for sex, and they'd be perfectly okay after a while. Say for a couple that might just go and get dick from some guy. But that sort of bond, that sort of, intrinsic value that they still get from their friendships, a lot of guys aren't getting that from whatever friendships that they have. And I can remember talking about how, there are some guy friends that seem to be doing pretty well and they have this really nice community and they're really cool with each other and they bond so well that they have what you could call that deep, intrinsic, sort of connected, bonded value that women also get from their friendships, but from guys. But for the vast majority of us guys, we're not getting it from our guy friendships. And while that reasoning does seem premature and it sounds like I'm pulling a lot of that shit out of my ass, when you kind of think about it, and this is something that I could probably say that I can check with a bunch of different guys, there's not that many guys that say that they have this deep group of friends that are almost like brothers to them. They don't talk about how they are part of this community of guys that they bond super well with. There's not that many guys that have that. There's a lot of guys nowadays that are more isolated than ever. There's more guys that will talk about having homies that they chill with, that are just mostly drinking buddies, that they don't really share anything much beyond the idea that, we can go and watch a game and get drinks together, and probably we might be chasing some babes as well. But beyond that, it's like their friendships don't carry more value beyond drinking, sports, and sex, or at least, and the interest in women and talking about sex and shit, which should at the very least tell you that there's a lot of guys who are in friendships and guy friendships that don't really carry that much value. Like, don't get me wrong, it's not like interests in sports, alcohol, and sex are completely valueless, but the value case, as opposed to so many other things, is so little. And looking at a good chunk of guys today that are in those sorts of friendships, it's not very uncommon to find that they are the same ones that are busy trying to bang multiple babes at once. They're the ones that will constantly be trying to chase a little bit of ass here and there. Like, the whole success rate bit is very variable, of course, but you tend to find that those are the same kinds of guys that are busy trying to find a babe here to bang, a babe there to bang, or engage in some sort of substance abuse, controlled or uncontrolled. And, when I kind of thought about it like that, it did make me kind of ask myself why it is that guys aren't in better guy friendships. Like, why aren't we doing better? Like, there's no quote-unquote real friendships for men anywhere, because you kind of think about it, there's not that many guys that say that they are friends with their colleagues at work, or at least have great friendships with their male colleagues at work. It's not like there's that many guys that are going to church, so there's not that many guys that have good close friendships with guys from their religious institutions. Doesn't even have to be church, because not everyone's Christian. It's not like there's a lot of guys that have great male friendships with guys from other places where they go for recreation, say like a gym. But then again, when you kind of think about the whole term recreation, there's not that many guys that go to the gym either way. And even outside of that, like the whole recreational side of it, most guys nowadays look at recreation as going to watch football and get drinks, probably with a little bit of nyama choma, so a little bit of barbecuing here and there. But even without that, because it's not like a lot of guys do that regularly, we are having a deficiency in terms of guys having good male friendships. And I think that's actually affecting us as a group. I think that's affecting us as a gender, as a people. Because when you kind of think about it, if a guy isn't trying to find good solid friendships in the workplace, because a lot of guys are like, what, the job is a job, you go to work, you go back home, we're there to compete and get the highest amount possible or avoid unemployment, and that's it. Or you're looking at guys who are not going to church, so they're mostly spending their time at home, they don't talk to their neighbors. Or even though you're going to church, it's like you just go to church, you attend the sermon afterwards, you bounce, you go home, or you attend whatever religious institution you're going for some version of religious service. You finish, you go home, or go and meet up with a couple of drinking buddies here and there. And when you're going to watch sports, you guys watch sports, talk about babes, drink, and then maybe chase a tail or two, and that's it. Like, there's no trying to grow with each other, there's no intrinsic value addition that you guys are doing to each other. And it's like, we actually don't have that many good male friendships or good male bonding experiences. And you kind of have to ask yourself why, but at the same time, you kind of know why if you're a guy, because we actually don't try to get ourselves good male bonding experiences, minus what it is that we find interesting. Now, granted, I tend to think that that's how people have always done it since time immemorial, because, guys bond over football, guys will bond at the gym, guys will bond at work, guys will bond at religious activities or religious functions or at religious institutions and centers. Like, all of those things did carry weight, and it meant that guys could meet up, guys could bond over some shit, and you'd become homies. The only thing is, it's like now people have sort of segregated those bits of themselves and say, for example, if it's a guy that just goes to the office, doesn't watch football, and doesn't work out, there's a very good chance that this guy probably doesn't really have any close male friends, not unless if he developed them while growing up. And if you're anything like some of us who grew up, us guys growing up probably didn't have the best of friends, or we didn't retain any great friends from like 20 years ago like some babes do, or like 10 years ago, some shit like that. So you find that these guys end up with little to no friends. I think there's also a statistic that shows that the number of men that can say they have a best friend nowadays is such a small number, and even those best friend titles don't really last very long. And you kind of left wondering if guys have real, genuine male friendships and male bonds nowadays. Because, like, if this is what it's doing to guys, pushing them to a point where it's like the only place they're getting some sort of emotional or deep connected bond is through sex with a woman, then honestly, that's something that needs to change. I think that's something that needs to change, not just for the sex side of it, because, there's a lot of guys that are busy chasing sex and, that feeling in the wrong places, and even the wrong people, if you want to add that, but just for the sake of improving the male experience overall, because there's a lot more to it that we need those bonds for. Like when we're going through challenges, when we're trying to handle responsibilities, when we need some sort of mentorship, or we need guidance on something. Like that's when those male bonds and those male friendships actually come through clutch. But if we don't have them, how do we cultivate them? So after a little bit of thinking about the entire thing, I kind of came to the conclusion that I'd probably have to try and give some idea of where we can find those friendships and bonds, because ideally I think you'd need to find a better friendship, and that requires finding friendships with a purpose, if I can say it like that. Like you guys are friends and you guys want to grow together, so you guys can choose to become friends, and you improve your bonds because you're holding each other accountable. You're trying to grow with each other. You're trying to create this this sort of family of guys where like you guys can learn from each other and grow from each other and help each other out. Then also you can develop friendships with someone that has a common interest. Like I said, there's the whole football thing, but I feel like you can do it with even more than just sports. So like I mentioned in the previous episode, like you find a lot of car guys that are into stuff like modding, or like buyers clubs. So like the golf owners club in Kenya is pretty tight. The Audi owners is also pretty tight, last I heard. And it's not like you're getting in there just because you have an Audi or just because you have a Golf, and you'll be able to spill out all of your secrets to all the hundreds of people that are there. But at least within those clubs you can also find people that share the same common interest. And if you guys manage to blend well and you become super tight with one or two other people, then you can develop pretty good friendships from that. That's a good place to start having a pretty good friendship. And it doesn't necessarily just have to be cars. You can still go back to sports and just take it beyond just the talk of football and the booze. You can include something else. There's guys that have developed great friendships because they have an interest in, say, business, or they go for more or less the same networking events. So they sort of become homies after that. There's homies that I've made purely through podcasting and because of podcasting. And, that's a pretty good place that I've made friendships as well. And if you're in that, then you can definitely make some pretty good friends. And when you sort of take in either one of those two approaches, that's when now you can start to drill down on the kind of guys that you have around you, how close you're going to be with them. Because at the end of the day, the most important kinds of friends aren't even the ones that share the same common interests or, have a certain shared purpose with you, or shared sort of professional goal, or just goals. It's the ones you can pick up the phone and call when you're feeling down. It's the ones that you can pick up and call when you're in some shit, when you need someone to sort of bail you out, when you feel like you need to trust someone with some information that is very, very confidential. Those are the ones that you usually would want to call. And for us as guys to get there, we kind of need to put ourselves out there. We need to go and actually start looking for friends a little bit more consciously, because in as much as we are in this hyper-connected world in 2024, at the end of it, we've actually become more lonely than ever. And in as much as we may believe that we've got homies, at the end of it, when things get tough and you don't feel like calling any one of them, or you know that you can't call any one of them, at the end of it, you kind of have to ask yourself, like, are they really that close of homies to you, or are you guys just in it for the fun? Which kind of brings me to the conclusion of this entire thing. We as men need to have better friendships than we have right now. Like, that's something that we need to accept. We need to improve on a lot of our friendships, and we need to start getting better friends that are more useful in the long term and when times get tough. Or else we'll continue being a problem to today's society. And much as I said, like casual sex and like casual hookups are always gonna be a thing, I do think that to some degree we are getting into a lot of those sort of situations because we're looking for a certain deep connected bond that we should have been getting from friends as well, but we're not getting enough of it, so we're looking for them between a woman's legs. And by the time you realize that sort of bond really isn't there, it's like you've gotten post-nut clarity a bunch of times, or you've done it with a shorty a bunch of times, and you're no longer interested and you're looking to search for it somewhere else, which just exacerbates and continues a problem that's happening in society today, and continues to fuck up the dating market, which, let's be very honest, isn't really helping anyone at all. Or, I could be wrong about this entire thing, and guy friendships have nothing to do with casual hookups. Either way, I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On IG, it is at the breaktime_podcast. On Facebook, it is at the breaktime podcast. And on X, it is at bagakazd. If you also want to give your responses, there is a link in the description below. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.